Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first part of a series that we're going to be doing here for Porcupine Real Estate called the Freedom Series. This one is going to be on food freedom here in New Hampshire. My name is Dominic DeMaria. I am an agent with Porcupine Real Estate. I'm based out of the Seacoast area. I'm in Epping, New Hampshire, and my wife and I moved here in 2020 from Western New York. In that time, prior to moving to New Hampshire, I was a chef in the restaurant industry for about 20 years and decided to get into a new field when I moved here. And I have three other panelists here with me today. I will introduce them and they can give a brief description of what they do. So we'll start with Anna Cantelmo.
Hey there. I'm Anna. I'm a cheesemaker in Southern New Hampshire, in Southampton, and I've been in and around cheese for almost 20 years, starting as a cheesemonger and now running a kind of 2-3 person small business.
Thank you very much, Anna. Stephen?
Hi, I'm Stephen Nass. I'm also on the Seacoast. I run and I'm the chef at the Independence Inn in Stratford, but I also run the Free State Food Network, which advocates for less government involvement in food. And we also work with our membership to try and help people within our network both collaborate with each other and reach out to the broader community and gain exposure.
Very good. And finally, we have Andre Cantelmo.
Yeah, my name is Andre Cantelmo. I'm with Heron Pond Farm in Southampton, New Hampshire. We have a 4-season, 50-acre mixed vegetable production farm. We have 3 modes of sales through the CSA wholesale and our farm stands. And we've been in business. This will be our 25th season growing food for the local community.
Very cool. Thank you. So yeah, basically what we're here to discuss tonight is the state of food freedom here in New Hampshire and how it is to do business and basically live here in New Hampshire with the rules that we have set forward. I'm going to start the slideshow now. Can everybody see that? Okay. There are our names. Very good. Okay, so what is food freedom? Does anybody want to, Stephen, would you like to define that in your?
Yeah, well, when I think of freedom, I think of opportunity without obstacles in your way. So when it comes to food, it's going to mean being able to decide what to eat yourself, being able to decide what to grow and how you're going to grow it, and being able to operate businesses dealing with food or work in the food industry without red tape in the way. That's what I would define as food freedom.
Andre or Anna, does that sound about right in your estimation about what we mean when we talk about food freedom?
Sounds good. Yeah.
So yeah, and why is food freedom so important to your average person?
I mean, I can keep tackling it.
Go right ahead.
I consider it very important because anytime you get any burdens in the way of food freedom, you're driving up the cost of food. You're making it harder for farmers, producers, and consumers to get their hands on food, to get the food that they desire. And I believe that like everybody has their own decision and their own mindset of what exactly they need for sustenance and precisely what those needs are. And I think that any sort of barriers that get in the way of food freedom are preventing them from making that best choice. And they can best make those choices by having as many options as possible. So that's what I would say food freedom comes down to.
And to me, the ability to choose. Oh, getting a little feedback there. So to me, the ability to choose what we decide to put in our bodies without any regulation from the state or whatever it may be is an important thing. And I feel like New Hampshire does have a good amount of that freedom. How do you think we rank against other states
Yeah, it's very interesting to try and figure out how we rank. When I go and look at our regulations and comparing to other states, I think that we have this underlying core of freedom throughout our state. We have many small farms operating, and the regulations on them are fairly minimalized compared to a lot of states. But what we don't have compared to other states is these broad sweeping statements, these amendments to the Constitution, or different resolutions that say that we believe in food freedom. They're just kind of already built in mostly into our foundation. So when you look up what states are best for food freedom, we don't show up on those lists, even though I think we're doing actually quite well. I think we have a long way to go, and I have a lot of ideas where we can go to become more free. But I think we're actually doing quite well, and I wonder if my fellow panelists here would agree.
And how do you feel the interaction between you and regulatory agencies is?
I was at a cheese kitchen in Massachusetts right before coming to New Hampshire, so I would say I do appreciate New Hampshire's regulation. I mean, for one thing, our dairy inspectors have all grown up or worked on dairy farms. That was not the case in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
So working with the regulators here has been good. They've really been willing to work with us. Yeah, and I know that like in Maine, I've worked with the Maine Cheese Guild, and they have a little bit less of a barrier to entry for cheese in particular, because they're allowed to sell heat treated cheese, which is not technically pasteurized. It's just raised to the pasteurization temperature, but it doesn't have to have all of the chart recorders and thermometers and verifications. And having all of that is buying a pasteurizer is very expensive. So there are some things that make it easier in Maine versus other states around us. But I think on the whole, New Hampshire is a really good state to be working in dairy.
Yeah, if I could give like a similar example of something I noticed compared to other states too. So I've been testifying on these different food regulation bills this winter session here. And on one of them, we're trying to increase the amount of money a homestead can have before they need to get special licensure and more inspections and regulations. And the Department of Health showed up to testify on it, and they wanted to testify against it, right? They don't want any more freedom. They want as much control as they can have. And their representative testified that they don't have any list of who's either above or below that dollar amount line. They don't even have a list of who, like any of the operations really in general. Nobody's applying for these licenses, so tons of people could be not in compliance with it anyway. And it's just like regulations aren't even being enforced anyway in the state because there's so little government here to be doing it. So it's like even on paper we might have these regulations, but the government's so loose here that it's not even as big of a problem as some places. Which I think
And
is
we're
great.
definitely we're not calling for more regulation or for them
No.
to start cracking down on the rules that are on the book. But
Yeah, so we might as well get rid of those rules because they're not enforcing them anyway.
I'm sorry, my internet connection was.
oh, you're okay.
Yeah. I missed some of what was going on, but I think I'd like to push back a little bit on the role of like what regulations do and how they might affect our freedoms and how they might actually empower some other people too. I think one of the things that we forget about one of the main reasons that we have regulations is that it's very difficult to have complete transparency, particularly in food systems. And so there's a certain amount of liability that comes when you serve the public. It's one thing if you're a homesteader or an old school CSA, which there are very few of those left. If we want to talk about the differences between what we modernly call a CSA and what a real CSA is. A real CSAs are when a community supports and empowers someone to grow in their stead. And then there's ultimate transparency, because it's the ultimate democracy in deciding what you want in food. But that's not how we do it now. And so having certain regulations like pesticide inspections, worker housings inspections, and food safety inspections are not entirely a bad idea, particularly when you're serving a public. And then on the other hand, it's also, we create the regulators we want by being involved with that. And so New Hampshire has been a educate before you regulate state for a very long time. And so when you're dealing particularly with the Department of Agriculture, getting the opportunity to basically get educated on the way things should be before anything really happens to you.
Sure, and I think that is an important thing to mention, is that we don't believe food freedom means freedom from, regulation completely. It's the freedom to choose, and not the freedom from food safety practices or keeping people safe. I do think there is definitely a place for some regulation. You don't want everybody out there doing whatever they want, because you could hurt somebody, obviously.
Well, yeah, and there's liability, right?
Sure.
If you're doing unsafe practices, it's a good way for your business to get shut down. But yeah, there is. I mean, what I'd like to see personally is allowing the marketplace to open up for more options. Like, we do have private inspections out there, but we currently have a monopoly on who you can choose, and not every industry operates that way, do they? There's just the ones that the government decides to get involved in. You get one choice on how you get inspected, who you get inspected, but you can compare it to, like, for example, organic agriculture. Organic's one label, but there's certified naturally grown and other competitors that can do the same thing. They're just less known because the government doesn't get involved in them.
That's very true. Yeah, and I think part of the whole having large scale regulation on all these industries has also kind of made it easier for your average consumer to be ignorant on a lot of things, because you're just taking those places at their word that these are the best practices. Doesn't mean that somebody who grows their own vegetables and has a farm stand isn't using really good practices as well. They're not certified, but because they might not have a certification, somebody might not buy that because they don't think it's as healthy as something that's certified organic.
Mm-hmm. And having been in quite a number of kitchens, I can tell you, even in New Hampshire, there's at least one restaurant that I'm not going to eat at because I've seen the inside of their kitchen, and somehow they passed health inspection, but oh boy.
Yeah, on that note, I mean, I will say, like, the more I have learned about food safety and the regulations and writing a food safety plan, the better my product has become. Like,
Mm-hmm.
those rules have actually, like, extended shelf life. They've helped me as a cheesemaker and a businesswoman. So I've benefited from them begrudgingly also, because doing it is not fun, for sure. But I also appreciate, like, as a community, as being part of a local food community in New Hampshire, if someone were to get sick from another dairy, that affects all of the dairies in New Hampshire. And so I do want there to be some bar that people are held to just for safety. And I think the Maine Cheese Guild, again, has done a really good job of, in New Hampshire, we don't have a cheese guild. I think guilds are a really great way to do this, and maybe we can get that going here someday. But they've done a really good job of educating their members and bringing in teachers. I've taken classes with them. And that has raised the profile of Maine cheese and the reputation of Maine cheese. And so I think working together as a community of, entrepreneurs and businesses you can also encourage that safety and level of professionalism.
Do we really, in what situations do you think it's necessary to have a middleman between the person producing and the consumer?
I mean, I would say when both of those two
Pesticide safety.
Sure.
well,
Okay.
I would say when those two parties decide that there should be.
Yeah, I would push back on that. I mean, I think you brought up some kitchens that might be suspect, but like I've been to farms that they fly under the radar, they refuse to get a pesticide license, yet they use pesticides, and they don't use them in safe ways that I would consider safe. I think that if you're using those things, those materials, you have a responsibility to your workers and to your consumers. I think that the regulations around pesticides have been relatively easy to comply with. It's just a matter of understanding what to do. And then some of it, when you have to fill out your form, particularly when you're thinking about modes of action, can make you a better farmer, because pesticides are classed in groups, and generally, much like you rotate your land, you like to rotate your uses so that you're not breeding a better bug. And that kind of goes outside the safety and into a practice, but by doing the regulation, you kind of are observing and you put things together in your class, and so then that class, you see what the last thing that you did was. I don't think that people just deciding that regulation isn't for them, and they need, is particularly good, unless you're not serving the public. I mean,
Well,
if you're
I would
not
disagree.
serving the public,
I'm happy to disagree. So I would say that, if you're spouting these benefits of this pesticide regulation, and I would agree, if you're learning from it, it's going to make you have a better product, then you as the farmer are going to be seeking that out. And you as the consumer, if you're concerned about pesticide usage and making sure that it's safe, you're going to look for the farms that are certified properly for pesticide use. But I would say that if I have a farmer neighbor next door and I agree with them to have them sell me their farm vegetables, who are anybody else to be able to say, no, you can't do that, if I'm, already in a personal relationship with them and understand the risks and can do my own inspections to my own assessment, or if I have that trust with them.
yeah, I think you're assuming that your relationship is the relationship that, most consumers have with the with with buying produce. So I mean, I serve over 700 families just in my CSA alone. I don't know how many people are in each family, and they they're basically keep it they have a certain amount of trust in me, but they don't know what I'm doing. They haven't walked on my farm, they haven't done all those things. And so unless you're in a relationship with someone and you know everything that they're doing, then you don't know what they're doing. And there is a tremendous amount of liability that comes up, particularly around the food safety or pesticide safety things, even in certified organic. I mean, some of the most toxic things I use are registered OMRI approved chemicals. So it's not a matter of like, am I using something that's like a certain label? It's like, am I using it properly? Have I been properly instructed in it? And I think just trusting that that's there is great for you if you're like, this is my neighbor, I know what he does. But for the general public serving 100-mile radius community with a bunch of my food, I touch people who don't even really know who I am, you know?
Have you told your customer base that you're inspected for pesticides?
No,
Okay.
we don't, yeah. They don't know what we're inspected for. I don't spout, you know, I cross the threshold that I'm a full FSMA farm as well. And that's not something that I advertise either. FSMA
So
is the Safety Modernization Act, but the, so we have to comply with full FSMA, you know, certifications because we cross the threshold of income. Whereas if you were below 25,000, you don't have to do anything.
I mean, what it
But-
sounds like to me is rather than have an informed consumer, we're putting the burden upon the government to handle these inspections and make sure that we're safe. But I don't know the farm inspection side as well as I do the restaurant side. And I can tell you being an informed consumer beats out trusting government inspectors any day of the week.
But doesn't it make it seem like your average customer isn't thinking about those things? And unfortunately, it's not something that you can just switch over in society to make everybody concerned about where their food is coming from. It's just not realistic. It will never happen. So having those structures in place is going to give them something that they can look to
Sure.
trust you.
Sure. I would just prefer personally that those structures be voluntary, you know, if there's a lot of consumers that are concerned about having organic food. So we put an organic label on it. The consumers that aren't concerned about that won't go for
I
those
would push
products.
back on that because I am not a certified organic farm because I refuse to deal with
Sure.
a certification industry. But like I grow in a biologically based system, and either people, like some people know that and some people don't. And I just grow that way because that's what I want to do. But I am not, you know, I really actually think that certified organic is a marketing scheme.
I agree.
Same thing
100%.
with naturally grown and all those other things.
I think we can all
So
agree.
basically, so basically, like, yeah, I grow the way I want to grow, and I've just taken the marketing hit, I guess you can say, because I do know that at farmers markets, there are people that come up, and I'm not allowed to use the word organic because it's owned by the certification industry. So basically, people say, is this organic? And I have to say no. And they'll walk away and go to somebody else's farm that I know doesn't use best biological practices and doesn't have the healthiest soil. And I know that I grow in a, you know, to promote the healthiest soils I can. And whatever way that that's going to work is the system that I'm going to use, because I consider myself a soil farmer first before a vegetable farmer.
But do you think do you think that if those regulations were lifted tomorrow and you could do whatever you wanted, you would do the same things, or would you apply those same rules even if you weren't being enforced?
No, I'm farming the way that I want. You know, right now, I don't need the rules to be lifted or not. And if they change the rules so that I could be a certified organic farm, I probably still wouldn't do it. But I don't think that crosses, for me, that doesn't cross the line as far as like health and wellness of the community that you serve. Like, it's a choice. People want like the certified organic label, and they are empowered to make a choice with their dollars to do that. And I'm fine with their choice to do that. But when it comes to like being educated on listeria and understanding what standing water can do in a wash house, and how fast you could lose your entire farm because of it, is important. And it's important because of the just number of people that I serve and that I'm responsible for. And to say that I'm going to trust somebody that like they understand listeria without, you know, any educate, I don't know that I'm on board with that.
So these like little farm stands with eggs and coolers on the sides of the roads, do you think there should be some more regulation for them? Because they're like all over the state. Although I feel like we're getting into slide number 2 here, but
Well, no, I mean, basically, that's when you're starting out being down at the level of service that, that you're saying that these are like, there's a guy, I mean, there's 3 of them on my block. I mean, the neighbors pick up the eggs from these guys. My father-in-law gives eggs away to people, in that same fashion. And, I understand that, but like, it's about the level of liability that I'm talking about. And
so you're saying when
like,
they're serving enough people, then that's where you cross the line.
I think when you're serving people that you don't know, like I said, I didn't disagree with your example of like, you wanted to do business with your neighbor. I mean, you probably, you could hold hands with your neighbor and watch them grow stuff. And that's different. But when you're serving a greater public, that's when regulations become a good tool for everybody.
But okay, so go ahead.
I'd just like to jump in and, I think that we've been really disconnected from our food sources as a culture. And so there's a lot of misinformation. People are kind of getting back in touch. It's this, back to the land, wanting to homestead and eat local. People are learning about this stuff, but I think there's still a lot of misconceptions. And so I know for myself, like when people want raw milk, they know a lot about the benefits of raw milk, which are certainly there. But there are also real risks, and depending on, are they elderly? Are they very young? Do they have immunocompromised systems? Do they know how to handle that milk? Do they know that it needs to stay refrigerated and can't sit out on the counter? These are things like, as a business owner, when you are reaching out to a broader, that makes me really nervous for liability and also just for getting somebody sick. I certainly, that's any food producer's worst nightmare. So I think education and understanding these things is really important. But as a cheesemaker, I've been doing this almost 20 years and I'm still learning about how to be safe and how to make the best products possible. And it took me years of, going to classes. And I think that that is really valuable, and that we can't assume that people just know what the risks are. Because I think a lot of times in trying to support local food, people will just talk about the good stuff, but there are some risks involved with some foods like raw milk or raw milk cheeses. And so I just think it's important for folks to understand that the people they're talking to may not actually know the full extent of the risk they're taking on.
Yeah, and I think when we have a food system where the public isn't informed because they're accepting the idea that these mandatory regulations and inspectors are covering it, but then in reality, these inspectors and regulations are slacking or not doing the job that they're saying they're doing, then it kind of I don't know, there's a clash there, I would think, where we have it's they don't understand the risk, right? Because they think they're being careful and safe.
I guess the biggest issue that I have is that if I was to raise a cow and produce my own milk and I was to drink it myself, there would be no regulation because I can choose what I can put into my own body that I produce myself. So where does the regulation enter? Is it just because it's going to somebody else that it has to be regulated? Is it something like I can grow my own vegetables, I can make my own cheese, I could do that and keep it for myself and nobody would have anything to say because I'm making that decision for myself? But where does the authority come in to say, I can regulate what you're doing, even though you're producing enough? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. That's the big debate, isn't it? Yeah.
And I think New Hampshire regulation does try to walk that line a little bit.
Well,
I mean, you can sell a certain amount of you can sell a certain amount of raw milk right off of your farm, and there are some allowances for exactly that, of like that kind of in between area. Yeah.
Andre, what were you saying?
Andre, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. Like, there's actually the paradigm in which you present is that there are thresholds, and the threshold is, are you leaving and bringing this out into the general public? You know, there's an idea that, like, if you are on your homestead and you are below a certain threshold, that your clientele, now this isn't a perfect formula, but the idea is that your clientele is known and more local. So, like, more of that utopian customer that we've been talking about, that like knows and is really informed about their food and wants to be engaged, you know, that utopian customer is more likely to like arrive at your farm, be seeking out the raw milk. Those things, that's when regulations are not really even that strict or existent at all. Same thing with your little roadside farm stand. I mean, if your roadside farm stand is just selling, even in the produce industry, if you're selling below $25,000 a year, then in produce, then food safety regulations at all. And until you get up to $500,000, it's just that, like, they want to know that you're there. It doesn't anything. They give you some ideas. Hey, you might want to start considering this stuff. But there's zero interaction with that inspection agency or that regulation agency. And that's something that we as farmers helped put together when they were putting together these regulations.
So you would say that overall, you think the regulatory environment within New Hampshire is fairly good for small producers?
Yeah, I think that
Mhm.
I think it's really good, particularly because with our kind of our sister state Vermont, who has started this like community-based food safety. It's called CAPS, and it's basically peer-to-peer inspections and peer-to-peer, like, how do we uplift as a food producing community? How do we raise the bar of like our communal food safety system? And now that community-based food safety system has become so respected that, like, Whole Foods and Hannaford's and Wegmans, they accept that as good as a USDA harmonized gap inspection. So it's because the farmers got together and were like, how do we create a culture of food safety within us so that we can be the ones that are actually kind of policing ourselves, policing our own community, instead of having some outside entity come in and decide that they know what's best for us.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Love it.
So I think we're blessed to have that.
Well, I have like 10 slides and I don't think we're going to get through much of them. So we're already at about a half hour. If you guys are willing, we could do another one of these at some point and kind of go over some of the other stuff. I would love to touch on the CSA idea that Andre brought up, the difference between a traditional CSA and a modern CSA. And we didn't even really talk about cheese whatsoever. So I would love to do that at some point too. Do we have any questions in the chat at all? I don't think we do. Okay. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. This was really eye-opening. It was nice to see both sides of everything. And I do want to plug that we have a couple of other freedom-based webinars coming up. We're going to do one on medical freedom on May 8th in New Hampshire. We're going to have one on political freedom coming up and on financial freedom, which we'll talk about crypto and fiat currency and all that. So if we have anybody who'd like to ask questions, we do have a couple of minutes. Just put them in the chat. We'll give it just a minute. While we're waiting for anybody to chime in with a question, you guys want to plug anything? Go right ahead. Anna?
Well, I'd like to say, working, if you're interested in joining this the community of local food. I mean, I'm more familiar with the southern part of the state. I know there's great farmers markets down here. Seacoast Eat Local is an organization that runs a lot of programming and markets. It's a good resource to get in touch with if you're interested in being part of it.
I want to apologize for talking so much. I thought this went to 7. And so I
So
was
did
just running my mouth off. I probably should have shut up a long time ago. So
I
No,
thought we'd
no,
make it
I-
interesting, you know?
This is good. Usually it's usually a lot of these things are we're all coming from the same side. Not necessarily that we're against each other here, but you know, I think we have a lot of common ground. But usually it's just like, yeah, freedom, freedom, freedom. So
We have a question in the chat.
yep, go right. I don't see it. So
No, it came to me.
okay.
Are there any upcoming votes on changes to food laws?
It's a question for Stephen, probably.
Yeah, most of them are passed. There's one tomorrow. I don't have the bill name right in front of me here, but it's not a major one. It almost slipped by me, honestly. It's just dealing with noise ordinances for farms, basically to say that to try and prevent towns from like regulating. Let's say you have a noisy rooster and say you can't have roosters because of that or something like that. I don't have it in front of me here what the bill name is, but yeah, there's not a whole lot coming up that at least that we can testify on. But there are some good food bills going through that they're going to be voting on. Raising the homestead dollar amounts is one. There's some little ones like dealing with seed labeling or apples and various things. If you go to freestatefood.net, there's some good summaries on there with the bill names, so you can track them on the GenCourt website.
And as a follow-up to that, is there anything we should know about any laws that have recently passed?
can I just say about a food law that might have just slipped by is that they're debating the ag water rules right now. So that's going to affect irrigation and our ability to irrigate off of public waterways.
Okay. That already went through, Andre?
No, well, there's two things, separate things. One is it's went through, but it's in a rules committee for the FDA. They haven't figured out what they're going to do. And that's about the sampling for E. coli that they want. But the other one that's in the state is about the amount of water that's being pulled by agriculture. And there's been enough complaints by the public that the public thinks when they see a pump in the water that so this would be a law that wouldn't actually regulate anything other than the request for documentation. So what they want to start doing is documenting how much water agriculture is actually doing so that they could log it, and so that there's a historical use. That could be good and bad. That could be used for you and against you. So no telling what the motives are for. Well, I know the motives of the people who are pushing it are actually good, but it doesn't mean that will be used. The information will be used for good in the end, but that's another story.
And then did anybody have any thoughts on the recently passed laws that consumers should be aware of?
There wasn't anything too crazy, so.
All right. Well, I thank everybody, and hopefully we'll circle back at some point and do this again. Have a great night.
See you guys.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thank you very much.
Great conversation.